How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Ganji. Welcome to another episode of Tear Talk. So, guys, I thought we could talk about the legal back and forth that we're going to have now with the Nick Reiner case. Because, again, one is, where's the family going to be? I mean, they got to be angry. They got to be frustrated. But are they going to feel that they need to stand by Nick? And, again, not because they agree with Nick, but rather we want to maintain a family unit. Maybe that's what Dad would have wanted. Or will they be on the side of the prosecution, aggressively seeking justice, life without parole, or death penalty? So this is going to be a very unique dynamic. Now, again, Nick does have a very strong lawyer, Alan Jackson, and I think he is in the process of getting ready to set the narrative. I want to show you a video real quick. There's two parts to this video I want to show you. One is going to be Alan Jackson. After the court appearance of Nick, Alan Jackson starts to kind of push the narrative forward. Basically, don't jump to assumptions. Basically, there's a lot we have to figure out. And I don't know if there's a family history here that we don't know about, but I think he's trying to start creating the narrative that may be beneficial for Nick. So basically, will they take accountability for what he's done? Will he admit that yes, I did do this to my parents, but these are the reasons why? And that's where you start to see the minimization of the accountability, maybe going so far as shifting blame. And at that point, if they start to do that, then what does the rest of the family do when that happens? It's just such a unique dynamic. But let me go ahead and show you this real quick, because this is important.
Welcome to Live Impact News. I am Julie Kay here at 12:30 in the Impact Studio, and we want to get straight out to some breaking news. The murder of Rob Reiner and his wife, Michele Singer Reiner. Nick Reiner, their son, now charged in the double murder. His attorney, Alan Jackson, is speaking live outside of the LA courthouse. Let's take a listen in.
I just have a couple of quick words. First of all, and most importantly, this is a devastating tragedy that has befallen the Reiner family. We all recognize that. Our hearts go out to the entire Reiner family. There are very, very complex and serious issues that are associated with this case. Those need to be thoroughly, but very carefully dealt with and examined and looked at and analyzed. We ask that during this process, you allow the system to move forward in the way that it was designed to move forward. Not with a rush to judgment, not with jumping to conclusions, but with restraint and with dignity and with the respect that this system and this process deserves and that the family deserves. So with that, we are set for January 7th for an arraignment. That's the next court date. And that's all I have to say at this point. There may be more at some other point, but today we're going to rest on where we stand procedurally, which is this was a continuance of arraignment. Nothing happened today substantively. We'll be back for an arraignment in the same department on the 7th of January. We'll see you then.
So remember, guys, at this point, we have no plea. So I don't know which way he's going. Guilty, not guilty. Most of the time, sometimes they go not guilty just to kind of test the waters. But with that said, I get it. He's creating the narrative. And it's funny, don't we see a lot of this now where you got both sides, prosecution and now the defense, kind of going out there and telling people don't jump to judgment because they know that social media, it spreads like wildfire. And I think that the thing here is the concern is the judgment. Does it bias people's perspective? So again, if I was representing Nick, I think this was a very smart move by Alan. Hey guys, you may not know everything. Don't jump the gun, but it's going to come your way soon. Just be patient, because those moments of ambiguity, people like to go ahead and fill it in with whatever. And then unfortunately it creates a bias that could be hard for either side to overcome. And that's great to see that both sides are having problems with this, because it's funny because it kind of goes with the wind. In some cases, it could be good for the defense. Sometimes it could be good for the prosecutor. In this case here, I don't think it's going good with the defense. So you see him coming out there real quick and saying it. But you also saw the other day, the DA from the prosecution side, you saw that too. The district attorney, he said, guys, but remember, let the process go. He's not guilty yet. He's just been charged, but charging is not evidence. So they're trying to do their best, because they know that this is going to have a lot of publicity, that they're trying to do their best to minimize potential bias. And I wish the media would listen to this. I wish they would understand how complicated it becomes when they run with a story and they just go ahead and just put anything out there. Because it does make it harder for both sides. It makes it harder to get an unbiased process. But let's finish this, because they're going to show you the report in court. So let me show you that too.
Why did you delay it? Why did you want to delay?
Family helping pay the expense. All right, so that was Alan Jackson, the defense attorney for Nick Reiner, the son of Rob Reiner and Michele Reiner, who were found dead in their homes by their daughter just a couple days ago. He's now facing double murder charges, and we're going to get an update from that CNN reporter on the scene here in just a second, who was there listening in. You saw reporters like her try to ask questions, and he just walked away. So let's see what she has to say about this.
Yeah, so it was very brief. It was very, very quick. The main thing was just disclosing whether or not they would let media into the courtroom and what could be recorded.
Having a little bit of trouble with their video there. So we're actually going to bring you back inside the courtroom from a little bit earlier, where we're going to see the defense attorney see Nick Reiner for the first time since this accusation. So this is from within the last hour, this clip you're about to see.
Continuance of the arraignment. I want to get it clear at this juncture. It's too early. We've coordinated with counsel from the DA's office, and January 7th, with the court's permission, will be a convenient date for us to come back for potential hearing.
Thank you. At this time, I'll take a waiver, speedy arraignment waiver from your client.
Thank you.
Mr. Reiner, you have a constitutional and statutory right to a speedy arraignment. Your counsel is requesting that your arraignment be continued to January 7, 2026. Do you waive your right to a speedy arraignment so that your arraignment can be heard on January 7, 2026? And does counsel join in the waiver?
I join, Your
The
Honor.
court finds that the defendant has made a knowing and intelligent waiver of his right to a speedy arraignment, and that is counsel joins in that waiver. Matter set January 7, 2026 for arraignment in this department. Bail to stand at no bail. Anything further on that case?
Not by the defense, Your Honor.
Anything further?
No, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor.
A lot of people are curious how he's retained such a lawyer, but I believe he could have money. Someone was mentioning, there could be money in trust. I mean, his grandfather was also wealthy, so it doesn't shock me that he's able to get a powerful lawyer. So we got 9 sections we want to break down here. So I got some notes in. I remember, guys, we're learning this together. So we start the dialogue, see what happens in the comments, and let's build. But I think this is interesting. I kind of like doing this to get ahead and then see what rolls out as the process unfolds. Again, this will be January 7th. So this will be when they have the arraignment. I'm thinking he's going to plead not guilty to kind of test the waters. And we've seen that happen before. And then eventually when they see what's there, then they work their angles and their deals. So before we dive into the legal complexities of the Nick Reiner case, I want to be crystal clear about what this conversation is and what it isn't. So this is not a declaration of guilt or innocence. Nick Reiner has been charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder with special circumstances in the deaths of his parents, Rob and Michele Reiner. He appeared in court for the first time on Wednesday, December 17th, waived his right to speedy arraignment, and his formal arraignment has been continued to January 7, 2026. He has not entered a plea, and the legal process will determine what happened. What we're doing today is analyzing defense strategies, understanding how our justice system actually works when the stakes are life and death, And Nick Reiner has retained Alan Jackson, a former Los Angeles homicide prosecutor who served as lead defense counsel in the Karen Reed case, which ended in a mistrial. Jackson knows how prosecutors think because he was one. He knows what evidence holds up and understands jury psychology from both sides of the courtroom. And it was unique because when I saw him in that video just now, talking to the public, talking to the reporters, I got a prosecutor feel from him. So that's interesting. I don't know. Did you guys feel the same? Because I felt the way he did it. I felt like it was a prosecutor feel. Wasn't aggressive. It wasn't like that Busby. This was just more of, guys, wait, hold off. Let's just let the system work as it's designed. So that's interesting because then he has knowledge of both sides. So I'm assuming he has respect for both sides. I wonder if that's a big thing. I wonder how many prosecutors cross into defense attorneys or vice versa. I wonder if that's something that happens a lot. Interesting. Criminal defense is never purely about law or purely about psychology. It's always both. But in a case this emotionally charged, where the victims are beloved public figures and the defendant is their own son, the psychological component becomes critical. And in a case where the death penalty is legally available, connecting with jurors on a human level can literally mean the difference between life and death. What we're about to walk through isn't just legal theory. It's the real world strategy that could determine whether Nick Reiner spends the rest of his life in prison or faces execution. I believe California hasn't executed anybody since, what was that? Is that 2019? Let me just double check. When was the last execution in California? Someone said it was 2019, but let me just, 2006. Oh, wait. 2019 was when they opposed the moratorium on executions. I apologize. So 2006, the last execution in California took place on January 17, 2006 with Clarence Ray Allen. I was put to death by lethal injection at San Quentin. My buddy Russ that comes on the show, he worked at San Quentin. And then since then, California has not executed anyone, partly due to legal, logistical, and political factors, including a governor-imposed moratorium on executions that began in 2019. But didn't matter because for 13 years anyway, they hadn't executed anybody. So, all right. So the family at the center. I think this is a big, important part in this case because you do have the family at the center and we don't know quite where they stand yet. We could assume that they're angry because of what happened. We could assume that, but it is their brother. So I don't know if anger has to shift into some level of forgiveness. So again, we don't know where they stand. We don't know the true dynamics of that home. I mean, are they angry at their brother? Do they understand why their brother did it? So we don't know exactly where they stand. And I'm actually very curious on that. I really am, because this is a family where the cancer came from within. So I don't know. It's not. I don't think it's that easy of a dynamic. So I'm curious, as I said, it's not an outsider that did this. It's someone on the inside that they all, I'm assuming, love. But before we get into legal strategies, we need to talk about something that's going to be central to how this case unfolds, something that will affect everything from jury selection to the penalty phase, and that's the family dynamic. So Nick Reiner has two siblings, Jake, who I got is 34, and Rami, who's 28. Rami is the one who discovered her parents' bodies Sunday afternoon. She lived across the street from the family's home. I believe from what I'm hearing, she discovered her father, and the paramedics told her that her mother was there later on. So she lived across the street from the family home. According to sources, when she found them around 3 p.m., she left the home, found a friend who was staying. So this it goes by what official reports are, but what I'm hearing is that there was a massage therapist that was trying to get in to see, I believe, Rob. He got stuck at the gate to get in. He called Rami, and then she went with the roommate, discovered her father. So some people say the master bedroom. I'm uncertain with that. Obviously, she's shocked. She ran out. The roommate called 911, and then the paramedics are the ones that told her that her mom was also there. But again, that's unofficial. I saw that in New York Times. So let me skip over that part. So Jake is the eldest. He's a writer, actor, and podcaster who shared a love of baseball with his father. And by all accounts, Jake had a different relationship with Rob than Nick did, closer, less complicated, and also more stable. And then there's Nick, the middle child, who has been in crisis for nearly 2 decades. On Wednesday, following Nick's brief court appearance, Jake and Rami released a joint statement, and it's worth reading in full because every word matters. So this is the first time the family said something. So these are the siblings. The horrific and devastating loss of our parents, Rob and Michele Reiner, is something that no one should ever experience. They weren't just our parents. They were our best friends. Words cannot even begin to describe the unimaginable pain we were experiencing every moment of the day. We are grateful for the outpouring of condolences, kindness, and support. We now ask for respect and privacy, for speculation to be tempered with compassion and humanity, and for our parents to be remembered for the incredible lives they lived and the love they gave. Notice there's nothing about justice, nothing. So this is a very powerful statement. It's focused on their love for their parents. But again, we still don't know how they stand with their brother at this point. So if you read that carefully, what's not in that statement is as important as what is. There's no mention of Nick, no condemnation, no call for justice or maximum punishment, no statement that they support the prosecution or want the death penalty, but also no defense of their brother. So you don't have a defense of the brother either. No statement of support for him, no mention of forgiveness or family unity. That's why I think that first statement of theirs took a while. I think it's a beautiful statement. I think it's well crafted. But I think it wasn't so easy to come out right away because it's from within. So I thought it was just, this is what we feel, and leave it at that. So this is a statement of careful neutrality. Neutrality, you know what I mean? It's a neutral statement. And that neutral statement tells us something important. Jake and Rami are navigating an impossible situation. They haven't yet publicly chosen a side. So here's what makes this case different from almost any other murder case you'll see. The surviving family members are also the victim's children. They're grieving the loss of their parents while simultaneously facing the reality that their brother has been charged with killing them. That creates an almost impossible emotional situation, right? So are they angry? Undoubtedly. Are they grieving? Absolutely. But do they also remember growing up with Nick? Do they remember him before the addiction, before the mental health crisis, before everything fell apart? Do they carry guilt about whether they could have done more? Do they blame themselves for not seeing this coming? I think that's a powerful part. Just to repeat that, is there a chance that they could blame themselves for what happened? And what I mean by that is not just, not in the effort to stop it from happening, because again, maybe there was nothing they could do about that, but maybe are we responsible for who Nick became? And that's a hell of a responsibility to take right now. But could that be possible? Because in their mind, they could be losing 2 people right now. So I'm sure they're thinking, what would dad want us to do? And maybe in their mind, they're thinking, be there for Nick. Maybe in their mind, Rob is telling them, be there for Nick. It's too late for us to do, but be there for him. And here's the question that's going to matter enormously in this case. Will Jake and Rami stand alongside their brother or against him? Because juries pay attention to family. If Nick's siblings testify for the prosecution, if they say he was dangerous, volatile, and that they feared him, that's devastating. But if they testify that despite everything, he's still their brother, that he's someone who was failed by systems and struggled with demons he couldn't control, that they don't want to lose him too, that could save his life. Because remember, at one point, Rob really didn't believe in the systems anymore. Said he had tried 17 rehabs. It just didn't work, which again, I did a show yesterday on that. I'm not a big fan of that perspective, but again, this is about Rob. So they didn't believe in the system. So it could be the same chance that maybe Jake and Rami don't believe in it. And basically, if they need something to blame, maybe not blame Nick. It's safer to blame the institutions that failed him. I mean, you never know. It could be an avenue. So we don't know yet where they truly stand. We don't know if they visited him. We don't know if they're in contact with his defense team. We don't know if they want him to face the death penalty or if they're quietly asking prosecutors to take it off the table. But we know this. Forgiveness in a case like this isn't simple. It's not about excusing what happened. It's about whether Jake and Rami can hold two truths at once: that their parents were killed in a horrific, unforgivable act, and that their brother is someone who has been suffering for most of his life. The prosecution will want to present Nick as a monster. The defense will want to present him as someone who was sick, who was in crisis, who loved his parents, even as his mental state deteriorated to a point where tragedy became inevitable. Jake and Rami's testimony, if they testify at all, will be among the most powerful moments in this trial because they're the only ones left who knew all three of them. They're the only ones who can speak to what life was like inside that family. They're the only ones who can tell the jury whether Nick was someone who should die for what he did or whether he's someone worth saving. And that decision, whether to stand with their brother or stand with the memory of their parents, may be the most impossible choice they'll ever have to make. And could you have a split? Could you have a sister on the prosecution, the brother on the defense, or vice versa? Or will they both be on the defense and the prosecution will sit there like, you know what, we're going to have to do a plea? So it's interesting. I'm actually very invested in this case, as you can tell from the videos. And as I said, I put the videos up. You guys comment. I grow, and I grow from the interaction and also what I'm learning in the process. So it's so much. But I also believe that as we learn about these cases, we can sometimes stop and see where there's areas that we can create an impact in. And if you look at the other videos, I've been trying to do that because I like the fact that this case is bringing addiction into the light and how it affects the whole unit, the whole family unit. So let's talk about the mental state, the centerpiece of the defense. That's my opinion. I think that's going to be a big part of it. If they wind up pleading some level of guilty or not guilty by reason of insanity or just guilty, but let me explain why. So let's talk about what will likely be the centerpiece of Alan Jackson's defense strategy, Nick Reiner's mental state at the time of the offense. I think we all would agree with that. So according to media accounts, including a 2016 People magazine interview, Nick entered his first treatment facility around age 15 and had been through approximately 17 different programs by age 22. He's spoken publicly about struggles with heroin and cocaine addiction and experienced periods of homelessness. And in recent months, according to TMZ, Michele Reiner had been telling close friends that she and Rob were at their wits' end over Nick's mental health and substance abuse issues. Now, the night before Rob and Michele were found dead, all three attended a holiday party at Conan O'Brien's home. And according to media accounts, several attendees described Nick as behaving unusually, reportedly asking guests if they were famous and engaging in loud arguments with his father that others overheard. Jackson won't argue legal insanity. That's an extremely high bar in California. What he'll likely argue is narrower but more effective, and that Nick was in an acute mental health crisis that prevented him from forming the specific intent required for first-degree murder. So this is critical. First-degree murder requires premeditation and deliberation, that the defendant thought about what they were going to do and chose to do it anyway. If the defense can create reasonable doubt about whether Nick had the capacity at that specific moment, they could potentially avoid a first-degree conviction. The prosecution, of course, will push back hard. They'll point out that Nick was functional enough to attend a party, make decisions, and according to reports, check into a hotel at 4 a.m., use his credit card, and engage in cleanup behavior. All of that demonstrates cognitive function. But the defense will counter with expert testimony that mental illness doesn't eliminate responsibility in a simple way. It can eliminate the specific capacity to premeditate while still allowing someone to perform routine tasks on autopilot. The line between mentally ill and unable to form intent comes down to functionality at the specific moment of the crime. It's not about having a diagnosis. It's about whether at that moment Nick could understand what he was doing and choose to do it anyway. And with nearly 2 decades of documented struggles, the defense has substantial material to work with. So I'm learning as we go. So it's more about the moment, the impulse in the moment. So if I was watching some other cases, and basically the thought is that it really doesn't matter what they did afterwards, even though the prosecution will try to push that. It matters about what was going on in that moment. And then the jury, if it goes this way, the jury will have to decide, did he have some acute mental health concern at that moment, or was this planned? So was this really just something from the beginning, middle, and end? After the party, did he get home and plan on doing this, and then all of a sudden carry it out, and then also planned on the escape? Was this one long continued plan, or was it something that happened in the spur of the moment? A failure in his mental health, and he winds up acting impulsively, and then everything else becomes getting away, not getting caught, but not because it was planned, but because, holy shit, what did I do? Now I got to go. So that's going to be something that's going to be unique, and that plays out into mental health defense. And I think that's going to definitely come into play here. And then I'm curious to see how the family sees that. And then you got, again, about challenging premeditation. So even if the jury believes Nick could form intent, the defense must attack premeditation itself. Here's the timeline from law enforcement and media. Saturday night, December 13th, Nick and his parents attended the Conan O'Brien party. Nick and Rob argued. Rob and Michele left. According to the district attorney's office, Rob and Michele were killed in the early morning hours of December 14th. The Los Angeles County medical examiner confirmed Wednesday that their cause of death was multiple sharp force injuries, and Romy discovered their bodies. Sunday afternoon around 3 p.m. Hours later, and then Nick was arrested. The prosecution will argue the gap between the Saturday night argument and their early morning hours Sunday represents a cooling off period, time to reflect and choose differently. That gap, they'll say, proves premeditation. The defense will tell a different story. Spontaneous emotional escalation, not planning. The argument wasn't evidence of a plan. It was a trigger. And those hours weren't cooling off. They were continued crisis. The knife suggests weapon of opportunity, not premeditated choice. So I want you to think about that. So the prosecutor, this is just learning here. The prosecution will argue the gap between the Saturday night argument and the early morning hours Sunday represent a cooling off period, time to reflect and choose differently. That gap, they'll say, proves premeditation. The defense will tell a different story. Spontaneous emotional escalation, not planning. The argument wasn't evidence of a plan. It was a trigger. And those hours weren't cooling off. They were continued crisis. The knife suggests weapons of opportunity, not premeditated choice. So basically, the time from the party, if they want to take the party as a trigger point, which we really don't know that, that means whatever happened at that party, when they left, whatever the argument was when they left, either he had a chance to cool down, reflect, and then still go ahead and did what he did. So that could be the premeditation, or the defense will say, no, he was still triggered. He never cooled down. And at that point, it becomes one long incident, if that's the case. So it really matters on how relevant that interaction at that party is. I just thought that was interesting for me. So again, the gap, they say, so just to read it one more time, the prosecution will argue the gap between Saturday night's argument and the early morning hours of Sunday, that's before the killing, represent a cooling off period, time to reflect and choose differently. So basically, now you're planning it at this point. And that gap, they'll say, proves premeditation, because at that point, you should have cooled off from the fight. You're no longer emotional. And then you must have thought this out. That's probably what you were doing the whole time, was thinking this out. And then you went back and then killed your mom and your dad. The defense will say, nah, don't believe that. The defense will tell a different story. They'll say it was spontaneous emotional escalation, not planning. The argument wasn't evidence of a plan. It was a trigger. And then those hours weren't cooling off. They were continued crisis. So as if he's going through a breakdown in that room, and he's still going through the trigger of that argument. And then eventually, I'm doing it, and then just grabs a knife, which is the closest thing that's available to him. And that's an opportunity-based weapon. And I've seen that play out in other cases where I know a girl that stabbed an old woman while she was robbing her house inside the house. And she did kill the old woman, but she got a manslaughter charge because she killed the woman with the knife that was in the house. And the argument was she didn't plan on killing the woman. And then that's why I guess she thought she had to defend herself, and she took the knife that was in the house, and the lawyers pushed that it wasn't premeditated, because if it was, the weapon would have came from the outside. It wasn't. The weapon came from the kitchen. So they could push that the knife was an opportunity-based weapon. It was there. It was available. And therefore, it may not have been premeditated. He may have just grabbed the knife from the kitchen in that rage, going through that mental health breakdown, and then went, I guess, from the guest house to whatever it is, and then took the knife and then carried out the assault. So here's what juries misunderstand. In California, premeditation doesn't require days of planning. It can happen in seconds. Just a moment where the defendant considered the act and chose it anyway. That's why the defense will hammer on continuous crisis. If Nick was in unbroken psychiatric distress from a party through the death, if Nick was in unbroken psychiatric distress from the party through the deaths with no moment of calm reflection, then even brief seconds might not qualify as legal premeditation. The multiple victims complicates this. The prosecution argues that continuing after the first victim shows sustained intent, and the defense counters that events spiraled quickly and severity of outcome doesn't prove premeditated mental process. So remember, guys, you had both incidences, both killings happened within the same incident, relatively right within that same time frame. So that's where the special circumstance comes from, because it's two back to back. That's why they would probably push for life without parole, the death penalty. But it's interesting to note here that for premeditation, that's why the defense will, what's misunderstood in California, premeditation doesn't require days of planning. It can happen in seconds. So if I was the prosecution, I'll say, well, he went back to his room. He had time to think about what he's doing. And the defense will be like, no, we're not having that. He was still in crisis. So let's bring an expert on, and then we'll go ahead and talk this out. That could be a big moment there. That I highlight right now. That could be an extreme big moment where one side will say that moment he was reflecting, and the defense is saying, no, that moment he was having a mental health breakdown. But to be honest with you, no one knows. So that's where you're going to see the family's going to have to come in. Let's talk about this mental health concerns that we're trying to figure out. Is this something that he was battling long term? So that little gap, I think, is extremely important. That's what I was thinking. That's why I put it in there. I mean, was he in the room? Was he thinking, planning, reflecting? Or did something happen at that party that triggered this mental health crisis? And when he went back to his room, he was just unfolding. So basically, he wasn't reflecting. He was diving deeper into the mental health abyss. So we want to talk about post-incident behavior. That matters as well. So according to media reports, Nick checked into the Pierside Santa Monica hotel around 4 a.m. Sunday. He used his credit card, booked for one day, never checked out. Hotel staff later reportedly found blood in the shower and on the bed. And these details haven't yet been presented in court yet. And they also said he may have bought some Heineken. For prosecutors, this is powerful. Checking into a hotel shows planning. Using a credit card demonstrates cognitive function. Blood evidence suggests cleanup, because supposedly there was blood in the shower, blood in the bed area, and then the windows were covered with bed sheets. Blood evidence suggests cleanup, awareness, and evidence destruction. Never checking out shows he knew he couldn't return. All of it demonstrates consciousness of guilt. The defense will reframe everything. People in extreme psychiatric crisis don't act rationally. Checking into a hotel could be disassociation, shock, inability to process. Cleanup attempts could be automatic trauma responses, not calculated destruction. And they'll bring experts on crisis behavior, and it won't look like what the jurors would expect. The key legal argument is post-crime behavior doesn't prove mental state at the time of the offense. Even if Nick's actions look suspicious afterwards, that doesn't prove premeditation when the killings occurred. So if the prosecutor would stay and wants to stay and focus on what he did after, leaving the scene, going to a hotel, and this had to be calculated, the defense would be like, okay, maybe, but we got to get back to the moment. And the defense knows that's a good argument because the only people that were there was Nick and Rob and Michele. So as a defense, I'm going to keep pulling it back to that moment. I get it, but it could have been in the moment. He could have wigged out in the moment. So newly released surveillance video shows Nick at a gas station convenience store hours after the killing, just moments before his arrest. No, wait, that's not correct, guys. Hold on. I don't want to put that in because I think that was not verified. So hold on. I want to skip that. That may be correct, but I don't know if that was verified. But I got the video. But there is another video that shows LAPD arriving with the U.S. Marshal, I believe, and arresting him across the streets at Exposition Boulevard and Vermont Avenue around 9:15 p.m. He was wearing a black and green sweater, a hat, and a red backpack. He puts his hands above his head, and he did not resist arrest. So it looks like I think he was very compliant with the arrest. The prosecution will use this video to show calm, rational behavior hours after the killing. The defense will use the same video to show someone in a disassociative state going through motions without real awareness. So they're always going to have their angles on both sides. Post-crime behavior is powerful but limited. It has to connect clearly to the crime and can't rely on too many assumptions. The defense gets to offer alternative explanations, and when there's a mental health history as extensive as Nick, those alternative explanations carry weight. Now, Jackson will challenge every piece of evidence, not because he expects to win every challenge, but to force the prosecution to show their cards. Hotel evidence, how was access obtained, valid consent, proper warrant, chain of custody maintained. If evidence was obtained illegally, it can't be used no matter how damning. He's aggressive. So that's why prosecution right now, they got to be cross their T's and dot their I's, because if something's going to be inadmissible, it's going to be inadmissible. This guy is someone that I believe will literally be all over that due process, especially if you know there's a chance that your client is guilty. I think you do attack due processes. You do attack credibility. You look to minimize. You look to change the narrative, because the evidence, if it's telling a direct story, I need to eliminate some of that evidence. I need to question how that evidence was, how they got that evidence. And then I got to question the credibility of the people that discover that evidence. So it's a process where, from what I know, is if the evidence is damning your client, then the main focus is going to be the due process. The main focus is going to be credibility. I mean, it winds up becoming something personal. I mean, at some level. Because once you start attacking the credibility, it's hard for people who do the job with integrity to sit there and take that lightly. But that's what the defense team would most likely do if the evidence is so damning. That's just in my opinion. So statement. So anything Nick said to the hotel staff, were they police agents? Anything to police? Was he Mirandized? Fifth Amendment violations make statements suppressible. Search warrants. The defense will examine probable cause, scope, and seizure procedures for both the hotel and family home. Most motions will likely fail. Hotel staff finding blood in plain view doesn't require a warrant. Exigent circumstances justified entry. Physical evidence doesn't require Miranda. And the family home search had clear probable cause. But these motions serve other purposes, forcing prosecution to reveal how they obtained evidence, creating appellate insurance, and occasionally finding a defect that excludes crucial evidence. These fights happen in chambers, in written motions, away from public view, and when they work, they can completely change a case. Interestingly, TMZ reported that Jackson was spotted visiting the Reiner family home, the crime scene itself. This suggests he's building a detailed understanding of the physical layout, the scene, and how events could have unfolded. That kind of personal investigation signals the defense preparing to challenge forensic evidence and prosecution narrative about what happened inside that house. Remember, it's funny because I would like to think the prosecution will look at things objectively and filter it through objectivity, where when Alan's going to go in, his bias is going to be to protect his client. So I don't know if the jury understands that, but you're looking at when the lawyer's telling the story, you got to look at it that he's going with a bias. his bias is to protect his client. Where I would like to think that the investigators, the LAPD, the prosecution side of things, they're looking at things more objectively. And this is where the evidence takes us. So the defense lawyer's now job is to challenge that evidence. So I saw it was interesting for him going to the house too. I was wondering the process behind that, but it's a wild back and forth, as you guys are very much aware. So as of now, there's been no public confirmation. The murder weapon has been recovered. It's about the murder weapon. If that remains true, the defense will use it. Where's the knife? How can you prove exactly what happened without it? The Los Angeles County medical examiners confirmed Wednesday that Rob and Michele died from multiple sharp force injuries, the official term for cuts or stab wounds from a sharp object. LAPD Assistant Chief Dominic Choi stated bodies were found in the master bedroom of their Brentwood home. But the defense will push on every qualifier. Multiple sharp force injuries tell us what, but not exactly how many, the precise pattern, the exact sequence, what the exact timeline is. Can forensics definitely place Nick there at the time? And what about transfer evidence? Whose DNA was there? Because they say when you're stabbing somebody with a knife, close and personal, but there's a chance that you could cut yourself when it starts to get sloppy, and then your blood trickles into the blood of the victims. But the defense will push on every. Sorry, I did that. Hold on. Forensic science in courtrooms falls short of television. Testimony is filled with qualifiers. They'll be like consistent with, likely, in my opinion. So these are the qualifiers. Consistent with, likely, in my opinion. Time of death is always a window, never precise. The DA's office said the deaths occurred in the early morning hours of December 14th. That's a several-hour window, not a specific moment. So that's why I just want to mention something. That's why, to me, specifics matter. When I was doing the Breonna Aguilera case and Austin PD was giving out specifics, and Tony Busby and the mom were giving out these generalities, I was like, I need specifics because I'm in tune with specifics. Generalities, it's just too much of a wiggle room, and that's because of cases like this. I could see that happening. Hey, you're saying in the early hours, give us a time frame because he left at 4 a.m. We know that. Could this have happened after 4? What's early hours mean? We need specifics. So blood evidence requires perfect collection and chain of custody. The defense will scrutinize every step, and every gap, every qualifier, every consistent with instead of definitively proves contributes to reasonable doubt. The prosecution must prove guilt beyond reasonable doubt. The defense just has to show the evidence doesn't get there. So again, the burden is always going to be on the prosecution because they have to prove specifics. They have to prove specifics, because if you don't, everything becomes a generality, and the defense will rip apart generalities. But it's funny. It's funny because they'll defend their clients on generality. So they're held to a lesser standard. So the prosecution has to be specific, but the defense can always be general, technically. That's why the burden of proof is always going to be on the prosecution side, because they have to be specific. But the defense, they can go on generalities. If there's a open window, they're going to take the open window, and then it forces the prosecution to, hopefully they realize that window was open, but if they didn't, it could become a bit of a concern. That's why when they do these cases, you want to have that integrity, because they got to prepare for any counter to what they're going to present. And usually that's what they do. Hey, we got this evidence here. How can that be interpreted from the other side? These 6 ways. So come on, guys, secure it for me. You got this, you know what happened, but you got to give me more. You got to give me, those 6 ways. We got to close this off. We have to ensure it, because this will get ripped apart by the defense. Once you put something out there, if it can get tossed apart in 3 different ways or 6 different ways, it's useless to me. But with that said, it does become strengthened when utilized later as context. So if I got enough evidence going this way and I can pretty much confirm that, then the circumstantial evidence I can maybe introduce. But I already got my strength here. So it may not be something you want to introduce at first, but it could be something that can come in later, hypothetically. But specifics matter. I don't want to lose track of that. So I want to talk about what Alan Jackson is doing right now. We saw that video where he's trying to tell the crowd, come on, guys, no assumptions, let it play out. And it's not silence. He's not being strategically silent like you see in the in the Celeste Vivas Hernandez case on the D4 BD, the Blair Burke side, the David Alberg, being silent. Now we know they're going through the grand jury. But with that said, he's trying to get ahead of it and trying to ensure that the narrative doesn't get destroyed by the media, because this automatically is a case that's gotten picked up by the media. And just from watching it right now, everybody is not looking at Nick so favorably. So he's, I agree with this. Guys, wait. And I also like to say, people want to talk about objectivity. Look at what the DA was doing too. Guys, remember, he's been charged, but that's not evidence. So they're also trying to prevent that bias, because they know the bias makes it hard to prosecute a case, especially trying to find people that have not been affected by the publicity. So again, let's talk about Alan Jackson, what he's doing right now. And it's not silence, it's active strategic narrative control. Since Nick's arrest, Jackson has made he made a few public statements. I think they're crafted. On December 16th, outside the courthouse, when Nick didn't appear, Jackson explained his client hadn't been medically cleared for transport. Brief, factual, no elaboration. Very quick. Hey guys, he hasn't been cleared, so he couldn't appear today. Fine. Then Wednesday, today, December 17th, after Nick's first court appearance, Jackson spoke to reporters twice. First statement: this is a devastating tragedy that has befallen the Reiner family. There are very, very complex and serious issues that are associated with this case, and these need to be thoroughly but very carefully dealt with and examined and looked at and analyzed. Second statement: we ask that during this process you allow the system to move forward in the way that it was designed to move forward, not with jumping to conclusions, but with restraint and with dignity and with the respect that this system and this process deserves and the family deserves. Remember, he worked on both sides. So I actually feel that's a very objective statement. Notice what Jackson is doing here. He's not staying silent. He's speaking, but strategically. He's framing this as family tragedy, not a crime. He's emphasizing complexity, planting the seed that this isn't simple case of guilt or innocence. He's calling for restraint and dignity, directly appealing to potential jurors in the media to not prejudge his client. Most importantly, he's positioning himself as the defender of the proper process of the system itself. I thought that because I saw a prosecutor when he was doing that. I felt that would be what a prosecutor would do. So he's defending the process. He's not just defending Nick Reiner. He's defending the principle that everyone deserves a fair trial, that rushing to judgment undermines justice. And you saw that with the DA. This is narrative control at its finest. Jackson knows that in high-profile cases, the court of public opinion forms long before jury selection. Every potential juror in Los Angeles County is watching this story unfold. They are reading headlines, they're seeing social media posts, and they're forming impressions. Jackson can't stop that, but he can shape it. By calling this a family tragedy, he's humanizing Nick. By emphasizing complexity, he's creating doubt before evidence is even presented. And by calling for dignity and restraint, he's making anyone who rushes to condemn Nick look unreasonable and emotional. And by doing all this through brief, measured statements rather than lengthy press conferences, he maintains credibility. He's not trying to spin. He's not making excuses. He's just asking for fairness. And who can argue with that? I actually respect what he did in that moment. And just the way he carried himself, I thought that was fair. When I saw the Breonna Aguilera case and the way Tony Busby was just throwing out and attacking the police and just, I don't know. I wasn't feeling it. I just did not like him. And therefore, I closed myself off to anything he had to say. I like how this was presented. So I like my first impression of him, where Tony Busby, I didn't like it. I just couldn't connect to that person. I just can't. At the end of the day, I still believe that he's throwing out generalities and the APD also be a little bit more specific. And if you're interested, I did do videos on that, and I try to present it fair, even though one of them is a little bit one-sided, but then I did another one where I was a little bit more balanced, but I really was not feeling that lawyer at all. So this is different from silence. Silence in a case this high profile would allow the prosecution and media to own the narrative completely. Jackson is asserting himself just enough to shape the conversation without giving the prosecution ammunition. He's also controlling time. And notice that Nick's arraignment was continued to January 7th, nearly 3 weeks away. Jackson waived Nick's right to a speedy arraignment. That's strategic. It gives public attention time to cool. It gives the defense team time to build their case away from the spotlight. And it means that when Nick finally enters a plea and the case really begins, the intense media scrutiny we're seeing now will have, we hope, faded somewhat. So every continuance, every delay, every carefully worded statement to the press, it all serves the same purpose, controlling the narrative and the timeline in ways that benefit the client. Jackson isn't trying to win this case in the media. He's trying to ensure that when it goes to trial, potential jurors haven't already convicted Nick in their minds. He's trying to preserve the possibility that 12 people can walk into that courtroom and actually presume innocence. That's much harder to do when the media narrative is a monster kills beloved parents. It's easier when the narrative is family tragedy with complex mental health issues that deserve careful examination. Jackson's building the second narrative, one that's measured pretty much one statement at a time. I want to mention something too. Since I've been covering this, I've done a couple of videos on this, I look at my comments and I feel that the comments aren't that as aggressive towards Nick. There's some, but then you see some people that have dealt with family that's an addict and they're kind of conflicted. And now, they're not so quick to damn Nick, because I think they're relating to this circumstance, this situation. So it's interesting. I think that it's hard to say because you don't want to say, because it is tragic, but there's a level of understanding that I haven't seen before since I've been doing stuff like this. Usually I get stuff that are totally one-sided and aggressive, very oriented to protect the victim. Here, I have seen some subtle shifts and then some agreements. And then also some people that may disagree but respect the perspective, which is unique. Like if I went ahead and started defending Kohlberger, rip me apart. It's extreme. It doesn't make any sense. But for this crime, it's like a respectful back and forth. I can see where you're coming from, but, look what he did. I know, but my son was battling this and couldn't get the help, and we tried. So I think a big part of that perspective could also come from how people see the person with the mental health concern, the person with the addictions, because there are some people that do believe the system fails at protecting them. So when the person commits an action like this, it doesn't minimize what they've done is still wrong, but they feel that part of the blame can be put somewhere else. So that's unique, because I think, you know what? Yeah, I could picture that. So what I'm thinking of is if I can blame something 100%, I'm confident with being aggressive in my perspective, because I can give it 100%. This one's tough. I don't think some people, not everyone, but some people can't give Nick 100% responsibility. Somewhere along the line, there's other areas, small percentages maybe, that they shift blame. And again, whether you agree with it or not, it's there, maybe through their own experience and whatnot. So they're not as aggressive with that perspective. They're not as confident in saying he's an animal, he deserves the death penalty. Because for Kohlberg, he's an animal, deserves the death penalty. We have no problem saying that. Here, there's a bit of a respected back and forth. Some could still say it, but some that are very intertwined with this dynamic, maybe some level of connection, they're not 100%. So they're not so comfortable and you could see it, but they're also being respected on the other side, which is pretty cool. I like that. So, and I'm wondering now, imagine being the family that's directly involved. I mean, could you see Jake say, yeah, my brother deserves the death penalty? And if he did say that, what would be your thoughts? Would there be some that say, oh, yeah, I get it? Or there could be some say, well, that's your brother. How could you say that? Could you see the sister saying the same thing? There's a history there that we don't know about. There could be a part where they feel that Maybe they're responsible for what happened. Yeah, Nick did this, but somehow or another, we could have saved Nick so this wouldn't have happened. So maybe it's not even about saving Rob, but rather we could have saved Nick. Maybe the family, whether right or wrong, feels like they have to take responsibility for the whole situation, the totality, which includes not just the not just the this is my father, but also our responsibility towards Nick. He's our brother. This is my mother. This is my father. Okay, but he's also my brother. Yeah, it's very conflicting, but we're not in a position to judge whichever way they go, because at the end of the day, the family is such a bond, that you don't know, and you can't judge because you don't know the history. This is someone that it's their brother. Sometimes working in the prison setting, I see people that may have done heinous crimes, and you see the family that still visit them. You're like, well, why can't they cut them off? Because it's their family. It's easier said than done. It's easier said than done. I think when it's family and you're connected, even if there's red flags, you have hope. And sometimes the hope biases you into seeing things that aren't there. That's good when the person really isn't. And maybe it's the idea of who you think the person is as opposed to who they really are. Maybe it's this idea of who you may think they are that you live with. But I honestly think that one moment, however extreme, for that family member who loves their child or somehow loves the aggressor, the one moment doesn't outweigh all the good. And it's hard for them to completely cut that off. And I've learned to respect that dynamic without judgment, because I see it. And then, God forbid, if any of my kids does something wrong, I don't know if it's that easy to cut them off. Because I would think in my head, I would look back at the moments that mattered to me. Wonder if I'm ever going to get those moments again. And maybe that's what I constantly strive for until I die. Your son, your daughter's a sick person. It may be, but they weren't always that way. And I still see my little boy, or I still see my little girl, and they need me. And I can't abandon them now when they need me the most. So I wanted to do a section about what to watch for. So mental health evaluations, defense will request comprehensive psychiatric evaluation, extensive multiple experts, weeks or months, watch for motions to seal reports. Competency to stand trial. Nick appeared in court Wednesday wearing a blue suicide prevention smock. According to reports, he's been housed under suicide precautions in administrative segregation. The judge ruled media couldn't photograph or video him, so he spoke only once during the brief hearing, said, "Yes, Your Honor," when asked to confirm if he was waiving his right for a speedy arraignment. If his mental health deteriorates, the defense might argue incompetence to stand trial, separate from insanity defense. That is separate from insanity defense. And this postpones trial indefinitely until he's restored to competency. And then you have the expert witness list, defense list, signals, strategies, forensic psychiatrist, mental health defense, forensic pathologist, challenging medical evidence, substance abuse specialist, building comprehensive addiction history. And then you got the suppression motion, watch when filed and how prosecution responds. Defensive response suggests vulnerability. Confident, detailed response suggests solid evidence. Family positioning. Jake and Rami's statement Wednesday asked for compassion and humanity and said speculation should be tempered. I think when they said speculation should be tempered, that's an effort to protect Nick. Watch for any indication they visited Nick, contacted his defense team, or made statements to prosecution. Watch whether they attend future court hearings and whether they sit on prosecution or defense side of the courtroom. This will signal whether they'll stand with their brother or against him. And then you have the plea negotiation likely happening behind the scenes. Prosecution might offer life without parole for guilty pleas. Defense will weigh it in. Is that better than risking trial and potential death sentence? DA Hodgman has said death penalty is legally available, but hasn't filed formal notice of intent to seek it. And that decision will likely depend partly on what Jake and Rami want. And then the January 7th arraignment. This is when Nick will formally enter a plea. Watch whether he appears in person or via video. Watch whether Jackson makes any motion at that hearing, and watch whether the prosecution announces the decision on the death penalty. Last part. This is the closing part. So understanding defense strategy isn't endorsing it. Jackson's job is ensuring Nick's constitutional rights are protected and the state meets its burden of proof. That's not technicality. It's the foundation of the system. The system only works when both sides are strong. Weak defense creates wrongful conviction. Strong defense means when a verdict comes back guilty, we can trust it. There are two conversations happening. The courtroom conversation, right? So did Nick Reiner commit first-degree murder? Did he have the required mental state? And can the state prove it beyond reasonable doubt? The public conversation is, when do families reach breaking points? Did mental health systems fail? Are tragedies like this preventable? And what does it mean that a family with every resource couldn't stop this? Both conversations matter, but they're not the same. In the courtroom, Jackson will fight for his client. Prosecution will fight for justice for Rob and Michele, and a jury will decide. Outside the courtroom, we grapple with harder questions about family, addiction, mental health, and when love isn't enough. And that's a big thing I put in my other shows. I think that's a big battle behind the scenes here. But there's a third conversation we haven't fully addressed, and that's the one happening inside Jake and Rami Reiner. They're living through something almost no one can imagine. They've lost both parents in a horrific, violent tragedy, and the person charged with killing them is their brother, someone they grew up with, someone they watched struggle for 2 decades, someone who is both family and allegedly the source of their unbearable loss. Do they remember Nick before the addiction? Do they carry guilt about whether they could have done more? Do they blame themselves for not seeing this coming? And the impossible question, can they forgive him? Forgiveness here isn't about excusing what happened. It's about whether they can hold two truths at once, that their parents were killed in an unforgivable act and that their brother has been suffering most of his life. Their testimony, if they give it, will be among the most powerful moments in this trial because they're the only ones left who knew all three. They're the only ones who can speak of what life was like inside the family, and they're the only ones who can tell the jury whether Nick is someone who should die for what he did or someone worth saving. And that decision, whether to stand with their brother or stand with the memory of their parents, may be the most impossible choice they'll ever make. The Nick Reiner case will move forward through the legal system, motions filed, hearing held, eventually a jury decision. But the broader question this case raises is about supporting families in crisis. That's the key. About limits of parental control, about what we owe each other when mental illness and addiction threaten someone we love, and those remain long after the verdict. Justice won't bring Rob and Michele back, but it can provide answers, accountability, perhaps some closure. And for Jake and Rami Reiner, it will also determine whether they lose their brother too. That's all any system can offer when confronted with loss this profound. I think there's a lot here. I know, you're watching these reports and people are, Nick's a monster and all this other stuff. And maybe, he did a very violent act but to be honest with you, we don't really know how to see him just yet. I'm curious to see how the family sees him. Because you don't want to add burden to what they're going through. And if they feel that they have to find a way to forgive him so they can move on, then I think we should work together to try to encourage that for them, because that's their decision to make. And as I said, there are some people here that feel compassion, but I think even some of their compassion is not just for the addict, but for the family that has to battle it. This is extremely tough, and I'm glad this came into our awareness, and I want to stick on this for a little while. It's not so much about the views, but rather I think there's an impact here. I think we could put some video ups to cause some good communication. It's not about having the answers, but can we finally ask the right questions? And I think they're coming. Maybe the solutions we've been finding all along have just been connected to the wrong questions. But I think we could take something here and learn. Because for something like this to happen, there's something that we are missing. And it's probably because we haven't asked the right question, and most likely because we stopped thinking. So if anything, let's remove all assumptions and let's start thinking again. Let's get ourselves uncomfortable, because uncomfortable is good. Uncomfortable means we haven't been here before, and I think that's the case. So let's get a little uncomfortable right now, and let's take advantage of this chance to bring this into awareness and ask questions that matter. And this way, no one dies in vain. Guys, if you like the content, please subscribe. Well, subscribe, of course, but also buy me a cup of coffee. Link to that's in the description, as well as on top of my YouTube channel. As always, guys, stay safe.